the average cost of the household food basket increased by 92 rand and 84 cents from March to April 2022 and by 344 rands year on year between April 2021 to April 2022. The significant increases can be found in cooking oil, potatoes, beef, fish and spinach. For more on this, I'm joined by Mervyn, the program coordinator at Pietermaritzburg Economic Justice and Dignity Group. Mervyn, good to have you again tonight here on In Focus. Food prices continuing to go up. Are we paying attention to this price on food continuing to rise, and are we mitigating nearly adequately enough?
Hi, good evening, Thabo, and good evening to all your viewers. Yes, food prices have been on the increase for way over a year now, but we have seen a sudden spike in the last 2 or 3 months, largely due to some global factors, particularly the Russia-Ukraine conflict, but also recently the decision by Indonesia to stop any exports of, for instance, palm oil, which has significantly increased, for instance, cooking oil, which now has increased 42% higher now than it was a year ago. And we're seeing the same pressures on things like potatoes, on chicken, on eggs, on beef, on bologna, on bread. The list just goes on and on. 35 of our 44 foods that we track increased over the past month.
Yeah. What has this meant then for households in the lower income?
So, Thabo, essentially what it has meant is that people in the lower income groups are eating less food, so they're eating less meals. They are eating essentially they're only able to buy the core foods, which is essentially just starch. And it has the potential to increase our health burden and disease burden in the country, particularly with regard to children suffering from undernutrition and malnutrition.
How has the retail sector responded then?
So the retail sector has responded. So women tell us that, for instance, many of the stores are now selling combos, which are very well placed, so they would sell like maize meal and oil and so on. So the retail sector has responded, but unfortunately it is not sufficient to bring down or to make basic foods affordable. And of course, the consumer remains cynical, the trust factor on government as well as on the corporate sector has meant that women tell us, fine, we got a combo, it helps, it really does help in terms of our shopping, but when you buy potatoes, you also have to buy onions, and often there's an increase on the onions at the same time as there's a decrease in the potatoes, etc. So households are struggling immensely, and in the low income groups are actually eating much less than they did a year ago.
Now, Mervyn, what we have seen, and of course it's not something that we wish to continue to see, but is crisis after crisis, coming from the COVID crisis to the unrest crisis, to the war crisis in Russia, to the flood crisis. I mean, if another crisis would hit, how are families going to be able to withstand?
Thabo, it's exactly as you say. I mean, our response has always been to a crisis, to meet the crisis rather than plan to build resilience. And it seems to us that the time has come when we have to become extremely serious about rebuilding resilience in the South African economy and resilience in the South African household in order to withstand the shocks that will come our way, because many of it is outside of our control, like, for instance, the Russia-Ukraine conflict. So what we need to do at a national level is we have to lessen our exposure to fuel price shocks. And one of the ways in which we can do it with regarding to food is to focus much more on supporting local food systems. So food is grown closer to the table where it is consumed, meaning that we need less logistics, less exposure to fuel prices. And then secondly, that we begin to become extremely serious about how do we help South African households to begin to save, because in cases like this, it is the savings that helps households to be able to absorb shocks that come their way. And of course, as we know, our wages are so low that very few households have any savings at all.
Yeah. As economic justice, how are you advising families, communities in this time, in how they respond? I mean, how do you avoid high prices? How can I save? Many are saying, Mervyn, I can hear you saying we must save. How do I save when already I'm earning so little and I'm having to pay so much for transport, electricity, and now in addition for food?
Well, exactly, and it is extremely difficult for households to save within current increases. Remember that the Eskom increase for electricity is still coming our way for most households receiving the electricity from the municipality. And of course, that is also going to make food prices more expensive because electricity is a major input cost into the production of goods and services. So what we are advising households to do at this stage is essentially to look at how they can begin to manage their shopping. My advice always is, write a list of what you need at home before you leave the house and stick to it no matter what. But we're also trying to encourage households to begin to grow some food in their backyards as a way to kind of forestall some of it. But these are really small measures. It's really an economic crisis that the country faces and really can only be resolved through means of macroeconomic policy.
Now, you have been calling for this sit around the table and say, let's really talk about this, because if you look, for example, at the reporting around inflation in the United States and everywhere else, it's even worse than it currently is here in South Africa. In fact, one of the reports saying there is, in definition terms, a recession currently going on in the United States with 2 negative growth numbers coming out there in 2 consecutive reporting periods. So all those things globally pointing to more pressure going to come towards the South African way, or emerging markets at least. Is this call for a conversation to sit around and really talk with Treasury and all those who are stakeholders gaining momentum, and are they taking this seriously?
Well, the call is gaining momentum, particularly around civil society, of course, and I think that there might be indicators that government is beginning to listen. Because what we really do need is to move beyond this crisis management. And we need to begin to look at a 10, 15-year plan of a vision of where South Africa needs to be. And our position is that that vision has to include the ability to access sufficient and nutritious food for all South African households, because our socio-economic development indicators depend on that. Without proper food, our education outcomes are going to suffer, our health outcomes are going to suffer, and in the end, our economic productivity is going to suffer. So really, we need to begin to look at what is our 10-year plan and how can we ensure that households in South Africa have access to sufficient and nutritious food.
Yeah. Is there an appetite for a conversation around, maybe not a complete ban, but a limitation, particularly on agricultural goods being exported?
It is extremely difficult to cap prices. We have seen what happened in Zimbabwe when they tried to do that. It crashed the agricultural sector. So it's really very difficult to do that. So what we can do, and what we've been advising from a country level point of view, is to begin to look at other measures. So can we make, for instance, transport cheaper, logistics cheaper by moving from road to rail, for instance, presuming that Eskom can provide a stable electricity. Can we begin to look at growing food closer to home so that there's greater production of food, more food coming onto the market, which probably reduces the pricing. So it's in those areas that we believe that we can. And then, of course, also looking for to eradicate opportunistic increases of food prices in which retailers are benefiting unnecessarily of crises in which the price increases do not fairly reflect the level of input. And in that sense, the Competition Commission has been saying some of those have been making noises in that direction. So I think there is sufficient traction coming our way. We just need government to sit and to say, let's sit around the table and let's talk about this plan.
Mervyn, I appreciate your time. Thanks for coming on. Program Coordinator for the Pietermaritzburg Economic Justice and Dignity Group, Mervyn Abrams.